Hi folks, we look at the second New Deal, past the first 100 days. As I think I mentioned, there was a number of fireside chats. I thought there were 6, there may have been 9. Now I'm thinking about it, I'm not exactly sure. Anyhow, one of his fireside chats was about the Supreme Court finding a number of his New Deal legislation to be unconstitutional. One thing that did pass by a vote of 5-4 was the minimum wage. So that was really close. Anyhow, like I said, a number of the first 100 days legislation was found to be unconstitutional. So Roosevelt had this idea regarding the Supreme Court. Now, there's nothing in the Constitution that says how many Supreme Court justices there is. Historically it's unfolded to be 9. So Roosevelt gets Congress to pass something we call the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill. The Judicial Procedures Reform Bill said, for every justice on the Supreme Court who is 70 years and 6 months or older, FDR can appoint a new judge. And so the reason for that is that the older judges are voting against him and the newer, younger judges would be voting in his favor. Even members of his own party were not too excited about this. Commonly this was known as court packing. One of the Democrats who came out against FDR's court packing idea was his own vice president, which is why he won't continue to be FDR's vice president too much longer. Well, Roosevelt had some critics. First there was big business like DuPont and General Motors who called FDR a socialist for tampering with the economy, that the economy is best left alone. That's what we've done since the beginning of this country, and as you know, going through the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era, just how good that is for Americans. When business is left unregulated, historically, they do tremendous damage to American workers as well as to the American economy. And so big business was very unhappy that they now had to follow rules and procedures and policies. So DuPont and GM and other folks said that Roosevelt went too far. However, the louder critics were the ones who said Roosevelt did not go far enough, like Upton Sinclair and Huey Long. Upton Sinclair, who was a writer, an author, ran for the governor of California on the socialist ticket. And one of his ideas was, if elected, he would give a $50 monthly pension to all poor Americans 60 years old and over. It was called the EPIC movement, End Poverty in California. Huey Long was the governor of Louisiana, and he used oil money in the state for public goods to build schools and roads and buildings and bridges. Eventually the people of Louisiana will vote him to be their senator. And as senator, he pledged to limit income to $2,500 a year. Anything more than that would be taxed at 100%. And that people could not own more than $5,000 in land. Every man a king, that was Huey Long's slogan. And early polls show that he would get about 4 million votes if he ran for president. By the way, FDR got 23 to Hoover's 16 in 1932, so somebody like Huey Long in the race could throw the race to the Republicans. Huey Long's not going to get a chance to run for president because he's going to be shot and killed. That's an interesting story in and of itself. And then we have the National Industrial Relations Act, Section 7A in particular. Section 7A of the NIRA allowed for unions. It allowed people to join unions. It allowed people to engage in collective bargaining. It gave protection to unions. Unions, had existed. They were pretty much underground before the Civil War, and they became open or public afterwards. But as you know, governors and businesses used the military or hired thugs like the Pinkertons to attack and kill striking workers. As recently as 1933, the governor of West Virginia used the West Virginia Air National Guard to attack striking coal miners. So, Section 7A is going to afford protection and to legalize collective bargaining. Well, FDR makes his turn to the left. So we'll be talking about some of the actions. First, the Emergency Relief Appropriations Act. The Emergency Relief Appropriations Act created the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, sometimes known as the Works Projects Administration. The job of the WPA was to hire people directly to build stuff. So, anything in Houston that is a WPA project? Well, of course the answer is yes, otherwise it wouldn't waste your time if the answer was no. Better question is, what is a WPA project? I'll give you a couple ideas. One, the San Jacinto Memorial or Monument, and two, San Jac High School, which is now HCC Central. Next, we have the Social Security Act. The Social Security Act kind of took the idea from Upton Sinclair, who was running for governor of California. The Social Security Act said that people, workers, and employers will put a little bit aside, a little tax every month, and the government will hold it. And upon the age of 60, people will get a little bit of that back each month until they die. I'm sorry, 65. Yeah, Upton Sinclair's idea was 60. FDR said 65. Social Security Act was both conservative and liberal. It was conservative in the sense that it affected very, 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 very few people. It did not include domestic, so no servants, nobody in the agricultural arena. It did not affect, who else? Who else did it affect? Farmers, domestics. Oh, I'm trying to remember. There's a long list. Okay, I'll give you the shorter list. Here's who it did affect. Basically white-collar workers, people who worked in offices, secretaries, administrators, stuff like that. And then as time went on, Congress is going to widen the scope of Social Security to include more and more groups of people. So, 65 was the magic number. Upon retirement, you would get a little check from Uncle Sam until your death. Why 65? Well, that's because your average American in 1935 lived to the ripe old age of 60. So, FDR said, we're going to go 5 years beyond that, in which your average American is already dead, so I won't have to pay a lot for Social Security. Well, so Social Security is in part conservative. Here's how it's liberal. Social Security is liberal because it's the establishment of the idea that government should assist the elderly, should assist poor people towards the end of their life. So it's the establishment of that ideology that government should be doing something. At first, a lot of the Republicans will denounce this as going to bankrupt the federal government, but as FDR pointed out, this isn't the federal government's money. Social Security comes from your contributions as a worker and then the contributions that your employer is required to give. One of the people here in the photo is Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins was FDR's Secretary of Labor. Frances Perkins was the first woman to serve in a cabinet position in the United States. I mentioned this before, the National Labor Relations Act, Section 7A, also known as the Wagner Act from Senator Robert Wagner, gave protection to labor. So no big surprise as the government gives protection to labor. Labor is going to, or I should say, union membership will increase. Well, the next problem was that, well, there was hundreds of thousands of people who moved from what a Denver reporter called the Dust Bowl to California. The Dust Bowl was this area: northern Texas, southwestern Oklahoma, southeastern Colorado, and a tiny bit of New Mexico. There was a tremendous change in climate in the 1930s. No rain, very hot, coupled with the fact that there was no soil conservation, no water conservation policies. Once again, the idea is, we don't want any job-killing legislation or job-killing restrictions. People and companies should just be able to do whatever the hell they want to do. Well, the result is several 100,000 people flee to California because their topsoil gets literally picked up by these huge storms and pushed all the way to the East Coast. I mean, it was this wall of dirt that went from the ground as high as you could see, just rolling across the United States. So, an economics professor from Columbia University named Rexford Tugwell came up with this idea of resettling people. Specifically, the federal government will create communities. This is what we call today planned communities. The very first one is in Maryland. It's called Greenbelt. What a lovely name. And so, actually, the very first planned communities were those out west to help the Dust Bowl refugees. And then eventually Rexford Tugwell is going to establish these planned communities all over the United States. Initially there to help the people in the rural area to get out of the rural area where there's no things like jobs. And then it's going to help the unskilled to get into areas that would facilitate training education as well as more jobs. So these planned communities consisted of places to live, places to shop, places to work. They were planned communities. I mean, that's pretty much the reality of the late 20th and 21st century. Home builders just don't build homes for the hell of it over there. They build homes with the idea that they're also going to bring in and build grocery stores and shopping centers and churches and schools and all sorts of public buildings and public necessity. So the Resettlement Administration really launches the reality of construction today. Well, all this stuff, Section 7A, the Wagner Act, will result in the protection of unions. So membership in the AFL and the CIO increased dramatically, which means labor unions or people in labor unions become a permanent feature in the voting bloc of the Democratic Party. Well, 1936 is a presidential election year, and the Republicans go with a guy named Alf Landon. Alf Landon was the Republican governor from Kansas. Here's his slogan down here. That leadership along the trail which we have loved long since and lost a while has come to us again. In the manifestation of Alf Landon. Notice the western image here, the trail. Oh, where do we go? Ooh, I don't know. Alf Landon will lead the way. I don't know if anybody remembers the TV show Elf. ALF. Alien Life Form. Anyhow, that was a brief show in the 1980s. So, the nation's largest monthly periodical was called Literary Digest. And Literary Digest did what they called a scientific poll. They polled people who you're going to vote for. Is it FDR or is it Alf Landon? And it's a landslide for Alf Landon. Well. For those of you who didn't finish reading this chapter, spoiler alert, Alf Landon does not win. No. And so here's why the Literary Digest got it all wrong. The Literary Digest polled people by calling them at home on their phones. And Literary Digest got people's phone numbers by going to the state's Department of Motor Vehicles and getting their home phone numbers from their car registrations. What kind of people would own a car during the Depression? Well, they're probably a little more wealthy than your average American. And people who are a little bit more wealthy than your average American are a little bit more conservative than your average American. And people who are a little bit more conservative tend to vote Republican. So, Literary Digest wasn't polling Americans who they're going to vote for. They're polling Republicans who they're going to vote for, and Alf Landon got about 75% of the Republican support. Well, here's the people who voted for FDR. White Southerners, trade unionists, farmers, Catholics, Jews, immigrants, and African Americans. This last group I find the most interesting. They had voted Republican because the Republican Party was the party in charge of the North when the 13th Amendment was passed. Abraham Lincoln was sacrificed to end slavery. And so African Americans voted historically Republican until FDR, because of the stuff he did that helped alleviate the suffering of African Americans. So this becomes the voting bloc of the Democratic Party throughout the 20th century. Anyhow, a 1936 election, Alf Landon versus FDR. Ready? Boop. Looks like Roosevelt won. Looks like Literary Digest got it wrong. So what does Alf Landon win? He wins Vermont and Maine. Whoop-de-doo. Here's a photograph of that wall of earth. Like I said, there's a lack of conservation. Both family farmers and corporate farmers just plowed without any thought of what damage they were doing